I was at World Vision and Catherine was there, and she reminded me today at the tea break that something I spoke there just in passing, which triggered a bit of discussion, which was that what's the basic difference between the success parameter between a development or humanitarian sector and the private sector, which is that the success parameter of a private sector is how much money can you make, and for development in humanitarian sector, how much money can you spend. And I'm not trying to highlight or underscore a dichotomous relationship between the private sector and the humanitarian development sector, but it could be a kind of bonhomie, a kind of complementarity between the two. You make money, I'll spend it. That has been the basis of a lot of relationships and partnerships that has been going on for the last several decades between the humanitarian sector and the private sector. And I think today we have taken the next step to move it forward from there. And not just talking about relationships which are based on give and take, but more about how to work forward together. The very fact that these countries have moved forward from the LDC status to MIC status shows that they have had a very vibrant private sector, which has a big role to play in each of these countries. And this is based on factual evidences that we have researched, that it's the private sector which has moved these countries forward, which means that the private sector has a big role to play in terms of moving forward the GDP of a specific country. The second point in context is about the disaster level in the world as of now. In the last 10 years, the world has lost around $1.3 trillion in disaster losses. I would not say how many countries in Africa have a GDP which is more than $1.3 trillion. It's zero. Which means that the countries in Africa have not reached that level. We're talking about trillions of dollars, which are being lost because of disasters. At the same time, in the developing world, 70 to 80% of investments which are being made are from the private sector. So when we say that $1.3 trillion were lost in the last 10 years, a substantive portion of that loss was absorbed by the private sector, which means that, again, in terms of the losses and making development gains, the private sector have a very strong role to play. First is about we need to have a very clear distinction, which I also mentioned in my opening line, between contractual or client relationships and partnerships. That's very important, because we often see that we are talking about private sector partnerships, but it's actually, when it actually takes place, we're talking about contractual status. We're talking about buying, selling stuff. Partnership is not about buying, selling. Partnership is not about contractual status. A contractual relationship or a client relationship might be the basis of a partnership, but in itself is not partnership. The second thing is about every time we open up a discussion about private sector partnership as development community with a private sector, the discussion which ensues for the next couple of hours is about corporate social responsibility, the CSR. I think we need to move beyond that. CSR, which a private sector does, is not, again, about private sector partnership. It's an act done by the private sector for humanitarian gains, but it's not about the partnership. And the third thing is about what are then, if 1 and 2 have been said, what's the basis of a private sector partnership with the development in a humanitarian community? And that has been very clearly outlined on the World Humanitarian Summit website. The 3 bases are, 1, the partnership has to be based on a business case. Second, it has to be based on common interest between the 2 entities. And third, it has to be based on co-creation of entities. So that's what we have done today in a way. 2 specific initiatives which are being taken and will be taking shape in the near future. One is about connecting business. It's an initiative of UNDP, OCHA, and we, UNISDR, which will be launched at the World Humanitarian Summit. As of now, we are doing a joint feasibility study to see what we can do and how we can do that. The results of the feasibility study will be out very soon. The second initiative I would like to talk about is about ARISE, which is about Alliance for Risk-Sensitive Investment. Now, ARISE has a history of a few years. We had the private sector partnership group, and we had the risk-sensitive investment group. We have merged the 2 to form ARISE, which is the Alliance for Risk-Sensitive Investment. It was a UNISDR initiative with several work streams, some of which include investment matrices, benchmarking standards, regulatory frameworks, urban resilience, insurance, and so on.